50 Apache warriors held the most powerful army in the Western world, paralyzed for 22 years. That's not an exaggeration. That's what the official records of the United States Army say. 5,000 soldiers, 50 warriors, and the 51 for more than 2 decades. Today you're going to see exactly how they did it, step by step, with every detail the history books never explained. And when you reach the end of this video, you'll understand why modern special forces still study what these men were doing in the Arizona desert 150 years ago. Arizona, Dragoon Canyon, July 1872. 12 soldiers advance in single file through a narrow pass. Rock walls on both sides. 104-degree heat. Canteens nearly empty. The sergeant at the front raises his hand. Stop. Silence. Not the normal silence of midday in the desert. A different silence. The wrong silence. In Arizona, there's always sound. Birds, wind, the cracking of dry earth. But right now, there is absolutely nothing. The sergeant hadn't even finished processing that thought when the first arrow cut through the air. What happened in the next 90 seconds was analyzed by military historians, documented in Army reports, and studied by generations of strategists. Because what the Apache warriors executed that day was not simply an attack. It was the result of a warfare system so sophisticated that the army facing them took decades to understand how it worked. And that system began long before any warrior picked up a weapon. It began in childhood, and it was brutal. Every morning, without exception, Apache children were taken to the nearest river or stream. In summer, the water was cold. In winter, if there was ice on the surface, they broke it with a stone and got in anyway. This was not a symbolic ritual. It was the first building block of a physical conditioning program that historian Robert Utley, in his work A Clash of Cultures, Fort Bowie and the Chiricahua Apaches, describes as absolutely unique among the warrior peoples of the American continent. After the bath came the run, but not a normal run. The trainers, veteran warriors, clan elders, gave each child a sip of water, just one. And the instruction was this: you will not swallow it until you finish. Miles of rock, sand, slopes, with water in your mouth, forbidden to swallow it. Why? 2 reasons. First, to force nasal breathing, which in the extreme heat of the desert is between 30 and 40% more efficient than breathing through the mouth. Second, and this is the one that matters most, to build the ability to override the most basic physical impulse of the human body when the body is under maximum stress. A warrior who cannot control the instinct to swallow water cannot control the instinct to move when he's been motionless on a rock for 3 hours waiting for the moment to strike. Utley documented it this way: the Apache warrior was a master of stealth, cunning, and alertness. He was capable of running for hours without tiring and of going without food and water for prolonged periods that would have incapacitated any soldier of the regular army. The military dispatches of the United States Army record something that their own officers found difficult to believe. Apache warriors covered between 60 and 100 kilometers on foot in a single day in the Arizona desert in the middle of summer. That's not folklore. It's signed by the commanders who pursued them. But physical endurance was only half the system. The other half was something no physical training can replicate. And it's what turns a warrior into an invisible threat. Hold on to what you just heard, because in the next 3 minutes you're going to see how that endurance and that knowledge become the most lethal weapon in the American West. Every Apache warrior knew his territory with a level of detail that has no modern comparison. It wasn't just knowing where the canyons or mountain passes were. It was knowing which rocks cast useful shade at 2 in the afternoon in August, which streams had water in April but were completely dry by July, which slopes generated echoes, and in exactly which direction those echoes traveled depending on the wind. The Apache maintained secret caches of food and water buried along their regular routes of movement. The analysis of Apache tactics compiled in the military history portal Native American Netroots documents that when they needed to move at maximum speed, they knew exactly where to resupply without needing to carry extra weight or depend on a central camp. This distributed logistics system was what allowed them to operate for weeks in terrain where a regular army couldn't survive more than 2 or 3 days. And there's something else that almost no one mentions. A novice Apache warrior didn't participate in real attacks right away. The initiation system required exactly 4 raids under the supervision of a veteran before being recognized as a full warrior. On the first outing, the novice carried supplies and watched the horses. On the second, he observed reconnaissance up close. Only on the third and fourth did he begin to participate actively. The historian who documents this system in Apache warrior culture draws a direct comparison to modern special forces selection programs. By the time a warrior reached his first real attack, he had already seen the complete process work from the inside at least twice. He didn't arrive at his first ambush without having built one with his own eyes before. It wasn't instinct. It was methodology with years of investment. And now comes the moment when all of that system reveals what it truly is. An Apache attack didn't begin when the enemy appeared on the horizon. It began days before. First phase, reconnaissance. A group of 2 to 4 warriors, never the full group, always the bare minimum, went out to follow the enemy, not to attack him, to study him. They could spend an entire day, sometimes 2, following a column of soldiers without being detected. They learned the marching rhythm, the rest patterns, the exact hour the guard began to relax, how many men were at the rear of the column, whether the horses showed signs of fatigue, whether the loads were heavy and slowing them down. Only when the observer had all of that information did he return to the group. Second phase, terrain selection. This is the most important decision in the process, and the one that most consistently baffled the Army. The attack site wasn't chosen because it was convenient for the Apache. It was chosen because it turned the terrain into an absolute ally against the enemy. Narrow passes were preferred. A canyon where soldiers had to advance in single file or 2 abreast does something mathematically devastating. It eliminates the enemy's numerical advantage in a single stroke. A column of 100 soldiers in a narrow gorge can use no more than 2 or 3 rifles at the same time. The Battle of Apache Pass Canyon in July 1862 is the most documented example. Chiricahua warriors under the command of Mangas Coloradas and Cochise positioned themselves on the cliffs surrounding the only water source in the area. When Union troops reached the spring, dehydrated after days of marching, the Apache attacked from elevated positions. The soldiers couldn't fire upward without fully exposing themselves. The warriors fired downward with the total protection of the rocks. The asymmetry was absolute. Third phase, positioning and waiting. This is the part that most bewildered 19th century military commanders, and the one most studied today. Apache warriors could remain completely motionless, camouflaged in the terrain for hours. Their clothing was the exact color of Arizona's rocks and dust. Their weapons were blackened to eliminate light reflections. They painted their bodies in the tones of the terrain. The site Apache fighting techniques, based on 19th century primary sources, documents that they built decoy camps to lure the enemy toward the wrong positions, while the real group was already positioned miles ahead at the exact point of attack. Army soldiers reported this again and again in their dispatches. They had scanned the terrain with binoculars minutes before. There was absolutely no one there. And then, without warning, the world exploded around them. Fourth phase, the attack. The signal was almost always silent. A hand movement. An animal sound the enemy didn't recognize as human communication. A stone moved at the exact right moment, and in fractions of a second, everything activated at once. Warriors on the flanks and at the high points opened fire simultaneously, not randomly. Each warrior had a target assigned in advance. Riders were the priority targets. Eliminating them at the start deprived the soldiers of mobility and the ability to pursue immediately. United States Army reports from the era describe the same experience over and over. The attack seemed to come from every angle at the same time. There was no clear direction of fire. That was completely intentional. The Apache positioned themselves in an enveloping arc around the point of passage. When they attacked, the enemy took fire from multiple simultaneous angles. Any movement to seek cover in one direction exposed them to another angle of attack. The average duration of a documented Apache attack in military dispatches of the era: minutes, not hours, minutes. The objective was never a prolonged battle. It was maximum damage in minimum time and vanish before the enemy could reorganize. Fifth phase, the withdrawal. And this is where the system reaches its most sophisticated level. This was, according to the Army's own commanders, the most frustrating part of the entire Apache War. The warriors didn't fall back together. They scattered in multiple directions simultaneously, each one taking a different escape route that had been identified during the prior reconnaissance. They regrouped at a predetermined point several miles from the attack, in terrain inaccessible to the Army's horses. Colonel Nana is the most extreme case documented in the history of these wars. At 70 years of age, arthritic with a damaged leg, he led a full 6-week campaign in 1881 with fewer than 40 warriors. Historian Matt Whitaker, in his analysis published in The Collector, documents that Nana never stayed still. His warriors doubled back on their own trail, vanished into side canyons, attacked from elevated positions, and evaporated before any pursuit could be organized. Result, 1,500 kilometers in 6 weeks, more than 10 direct engagements with the Army. 0 captures. The United States Army sent thousands of soldiers to pursue fewer than 40 men, and they couldn't catch them. Arizona, Dragoon Canyon, July 1872, 90 seconds. That's how long the attack lasted. When the dust settled and the canyon returned to silence, the soldiers who survived wrote something in their reports that appears repeatedly in the military documents of the era, in different words, but always with the same astonishment. The Apache warriors didn't fight like an army. They fought like the terrain itself, as if the rocks and the cliffs had decided to attack, as if the desert came alive for 90 seconds and then turned back to stone and dust. What those soldiers couldn't articulate, we understand today with precision. The Apache warriors didn't have a supernatural advantage. They had systematic physical training from childhood. They had absolute knowledge of every meter of their territory. They had tactical intelligence before combat. They had fire discipline, arc positioning, and withdrawal protocols that made effective pursuit impossible. They had, in short, the most sophisticated combat system that existed in the American West in the 19th century, and they built it without military academies, without written manuals, without industrial logistics, in the most hostile desert on the continent, against 2 national armies simultaneously for more than 20 years. Today, Special Forces units in multiple countries study what these warriors did, not as a historical curiosity, as operational doctrine. The manual carries many modern names. The tactic that originated it carries only one, and that name is Apache.